I'm so tired. I know, but we were not gonna sit. We would have like multiple prepare.
Yeah.
There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. Since dinner, the cold winter wind had brought with it rain so penetrating that outdoor exercise was now out of the question. I was glad of it. I never liked long walks. Dreadful to me was the coming home in the raw twilight with nipped fingers and toes, and a heart saddened by the chidings of Bessie, the nurse, and humbled by the consciousness of my inferiority to my cousin, John Reed. The said John Reed was now lounging by his mamma in the drawing room. She lay reclined on a sofa, and with her darling by her, who was for now neither quarrelling nor crying, she looked perfectly happy. Me she dispensed from joining the group, saying, she regretted to be under the necessity of keeping me at a distance, but that until she could observe that I was endeavouring in good earnest to acquire a more attractive and sprightly manner, something lighter, perhaps, Jane, she really must exclude me from privileges intended only for contented, happy little children. What exactly have I done? I asked. Jane! I don't like criticisers or questioners. Besides, there is something truly forbidding in a child taking up her elder. Be seated elsewhere, and until you can speak pleasantly, remain silent. A breakfast room adjoined the drawing room. I slipped in there. I returned to my book, Bewick's History of British Birds, and with a Bewick on my knee, I was then happy at least in my way. I feared nothing but interruption, and that came far too soon. The breakfast room door opened. What do you want? I asked with awkward diffidence. Say, what do you want, Master Reed? Was the reply from John Reed, my cousin. John Reed was a schoolboy of 14 years old. 4 years older than Jane, for she is but 10. John was large and stout for his age. He gorged himself at table, which made him bilious. John had an antipathy towards me. He bullied me not 2 or 3 times in a week, nor once or twice in a day, but continuously. Every nerve she has fears me, and every morsel of flesh in her bone shrinks when I come near. He now spent some 3 minutes in thrusting out his tongue as far as he could at me without damaging the root. What are you doing in here, you rat? I was reading. Oh, you're not allowed to take our books. You are dependent, Mamma says. Your parents left you no money. They are dead. You ought to beg, and not to live here in a house with a gentleman's child like me, and eat the same meals I do at my mamma's expense. Now, I'll teach you to rummage my bookshelf, for they are mine. Everything in this house belongs to me, or will do in a few years. I saw him lift and poise the book, and stand in act to hurl it. I started aside with a cry of alarm. Not soon enough, however, the book was flung. It hit me, and I fell, cutting my head on the doorknob. The cut bled. The pain was sharp. Wicked and cruel boy, I cried. You are like a murderer. You are like a slave driver. You are like a Roman emperor. I had read Goldsmith's History of Rome and formed my own opinions on Nero, Caligula, etc. What? What did you say to me? Oh, won't I tell Mama? But first, he ran headlong at me. I felt him grab my hair and my shoulder. I really saw in him a tyrant, a murderer. I don't exactly know what happened next or what I did with my hands, but I heard him cry out, "Get off me! Jane! Jane, you rat!" Aid was near him. Mrs. Reed flew into the room, followed by the 2 maids. These are the 2 maids. What a fury she has to fly at Master John. Did you ever see such a wicked and cruel girl? This is Mrs. Reed. Take her away to the Red Room and lock her in there. 4 hands were immediately laid upon me.
And I was born upstairs.
The Red Room. It was a square chamber with its blinds always drawn down. 9 years ago, my uncle, Mr. Reed, had died in this room. And ever since that day, a sense of dreary consecration had guarded it. I was a discord in this house. I was like nobody there. Mrs. Reed and my cousin did not love me. That was a fact. Daylight began to forsake the Red Room. I grew by degrees as cold as stone. Everyone constantly said that I was wicked, and perhaps I might be so. And so was I fit to die? Was I fit to die and join Mr. Reed? I began to recall what I'd heard of dead men, revisiting the earth to punish and avenge. And I thought Mr. Reed's spirit might quit its abode in the unknown world of the departed and rise before me in this chamber. I wiped my tears and hushed my sobs, fearful lest any show of violent grief might further tempt the spirit. I tried to look boldly around the dark room. It was at this moment, however, that I saw a light gleam on the wall. Was it? Could it be? A spirit? A ghost? Let me out! Please! Help me! Jane, what is all this? I saw a light, and I thought a ghost had come. Jane, you have screamed on purpose. Be assured, child. You shall not get out of this room by those means. You shall now stay in here 2 hours longer. No, Aunt, please! Have pity on me! Forgive me for whatever I've taken! Silence. This violence is almost repulsive. I heard Mrs. Reed sweeping away. Soon afterwards, she was gone. I suppose I next had a series of fit. Unconsciousness close to the scene. Soon afterwards, I was sent away to the Lowood Institute for poor, orphaned, and abandoned girls. Oh, right. Jane Eyre, you have a wicked heart, and you must pray to God to change it, to take away your wicked heart of stone, and to give you a heart of flesh. Let us all pray for Jane. Amen. Hitherto, I've recorded in detail the events of my insignificant existence. The first 10 years of my life I've given almost as many minutes. But this is not to be a regular autobiography. We simply haven't the time. I now pass a space of 8 years in complete silence, except to say that I graduated from the Lowood Institute and became a teacher there myself. Until one day I thought, I cannot spend the rest of my days at the Lowood Institute for poor, orphaned, and abandoned girls. But where am I to go? The answer came quite naturally to my mind. Those who want a change of situation advertise in the newspaper as a governess.
To Jane Eyre, who advertised in the newspaper last Thursday. A situation can be offered her where there is but one pupil, a little girl under 10 years of old. The salary is £30 per annum. Jane Eyre is requested to travel at her earliest convenience. Signed, Mrs. Fairfax, housekeeper of Thornfield Hall.
And so, I went. The house, Thornfield Hall, was a stately, imposing thing, with great battlements reaching up to the sky. Something about the house was eerie. Mrs. Fairfax was the neatest imaginable little elderly lady.
Oh, what was that, my dear? Oh, you must speak up. I am a little deaf. Oh, I am only the housekeeper of Thornfield. Mr. Rochester is the master. He is not here currently, nor does he come very often at all. The laughter you hear sometimes around the house is only a housemaid. She likes to keep herself merry.
And as for my pupil, her name was Adela.
Oh, vous parlez français? Oh, you speak my language so well, Miss Eyre. I will be able to tell you all my secrets.
She was only 9, so she did not have many secrets. Adela was Mr. Rochester's ward, not his daughter, and she'd only lived in England for 6 months, having been born on the continent. That means France. October, November, December all passed away. It is vain to say that human beings ought to be satisfied with tranquility. They must have action, and they will make it if they cannot find it. One afternoon in January, I was tired of sitting still in the library a whole long morning. And so, after my lessons were done, I offered to take one of Mrs. Fairfax's letters to town. It would be a pleasant afternoon walk. The ground was hard, the air was still, my road was lonely. Far and wide on either side of me stretched only fields. I lingered till the sun sank down crimson amongst the trees. Suddenly, a rude noise broke the silence. A horse was coming, and on its back a rider. They passed by me, and I went on a few steps. But a clattering tumble arrested my attention. Man and horse were down. It had slipped on a sheet of ice. "Are you injured, sir?" I cannot tell you exactly what the man was saying for propriety's sake, but I can tell you that I think he was swearing a great deal. "If you are injured and want help, sir, I can fetch someone from Thornfield Hall." "You will just stand away on one side," was the gruff response. And the stranger rose and tried to put his weight on his injured leg, which resulted in pain! Something of daylight still lingered, and I could see the man quite plainly, and I traced the general points of middle height and not an unpleasing dark brow. If even the stranger had smiled and been good-humoured to me when I approached him, if he had put off my offer of assistance gaily and with thanks, I should have gone my way and not felt any need to renew inquiries. But the frown, the roughness of the traveller, it kept me in my place. I retained my station when he waved at me to go and said, "I cannot think of leaving you, sir, at so late an hour till I see that you are properly fit to mount your horse." He looked at me when I said that. He had hardly looked in my direction before. "Well, I think it's late for yourself to be out this time of night. Where do you come from?" "From just below, sir, and I'm not at all afraid of being out when it is moonlight." "From just below, eh? Do you mean that house with the battlements?" "Yes, sir, Thornfield Hall." "Huh. Who lives there?" "That is Mr. Rochester's house, sir." "Mr. Rochester? Do you know him?" "No, sir, I have never met him before." "He is not resident, then?" "No, sir, he is not." "Do you know where he is?" "No, sir, I have never met him. I am only the new governess." "Ah, the new governess, I see." And again he tried to rise and put his weight on his leg again, which again resulted in pain! "I think you will be able to help me, actually, if you will be so kind. Try to grab my horse's bridle and bring her to me." I endeavored to catch the bridle, but the horse was a spirited thing and would not let me near its head. The stranger waited and watched for some time, before laughing. "I see the mountain will never be brought to Muhammad, so all you can do is aid Muhammad to go to the mountain. Come here. Necessity compels me to make you useful." And he put his hand on my shoulder, and the two of us limped together to his horse. He sprang on, and a touch of a spurred heel made the horse bound away. I walked on. It was a moment of no intrigue, no romance, no incident, in a sense. And yet it marked with change one single hour of a monotonous life. And who do you think the rider was, dear audience? I think you've already suspected that it was, in fact, Mr. Rochester, master of Thornfield Hall. For several subsequent days, I saw little of Mr. Rochester. Our acquaintance was only confined to the brief passing in the hallway where he would acknowledge my presence by a distant nod or a cool glance. Until one evening, as I passed by the drawing room, from the depths of an immense easy chair by the fireside, I heard a voice call out, "Miss Eyre, pull up a chair." Now, I've noticed that when your eyes are not generally bent on the carpet, they are pointed directly at my face. What? Do you find me handsome? Oh, I should have replied by something conventionally vague and polite. The answer somehow slipped from my tongue. "No, sir, I do not." "No, sir? Well, what fault do you find with me? Does my forehead not please you?" "Sir, I was too plain. I beg your pardon. It was a blunder." "Yes, it was. And you shall pay for it. We're going to have a conversation. Now, speak." "Speak? Oh, what about, sir?" "Anything you like." "Anything I like." Accordingly, I sat and said nothing. Huh. You're stubborn, Miss Eyre. And now, annoyed? If you wish me to speak for the mere act of speaking, sir, you'll find you've addressed yourself to entirely the wrong person. Ask me specific questions, and I will do my best to answer those. Well, but as I've roamed half the world while you've lived quietly in a corner, what questions can I possibly ask you? Don't I have a right to be so masterful? I don't think, sir, you've a right to command me, merely because you've seen more of the world than I have. Your claim to superiority depends entirely on the use you've made of your time and privileges. Yes. Yes, you are right. I do have a great many faults, I do know that. Let me tell you, Miss Eyre, I was thrust into the wrong track at the age of 21, and have never recovered the right course since. But I might have been as good as you, almost as stainless. As the weeks passed, Mr. Rochester and I continued our nightly discussions. His face was now the object I best liked to see. I would tell him stories of Mrs. Reed and the Lowood Institute for Poor Orphaned and Abandoned Girls. He would listen. But I had not forgotten his faults, indeed. I knew that his great kindness to me was balanced by an unjust severity to many others. But I believe that his harshness and moodiness had the source in some cruel cross with fate. One night, after we parted ways, I retreated to my bed and waited for the arrival of slumber. However, it was not fated that I should sleep that night. There was a demonic laugh, uttered, it seemed, at the very keyhole of my door. Who's there? I opened the door with a trembling hand. There was a candle burning on the ground that had not been there before. But still more amazed was I to perceive the air filled with smoke and a strong smell of burning. I looked down the hallway. Mr. Rochester's door was ajar, with smoke billowing from thence. I rushed inside. Tongues of flame darted round the bed. In the midst of it, Mr. Rochester lay stretched motionless in deep sleep. "Wake! Wake!" I cried. But he only murmured and turned. The smoke had stupefied him. I rushed to his water basin, heaved it up, and poured it over the bed and its occupant, succeeding finally in extinguishing the blaze. What? Is there a flood? He had finally roused at last. No, sir, there is no flood. But there has been a fire. Someone has tried to hurt you, sir. I heard them laughing in the hallway. Shall I go and fetch Mrs. Fairfax? Mrs. Fairfax? What the deuce can she do? His face expressed more concern than astonishment. No, Jane, just be still.
I am going to leave you for a few minutes. Do not move or talk to anyone.
Then he went. I was left in total darkness. Who on earth had done such a thing? After a very long time, Mr. Rochester finally returned, pale and very gloomy.
It is just as I thought. I have found it all out. I forget whether you say you saw anything when you opened your door.
No, sir, just the candlestick burning on the ground.
But you did say that you heard someone laughing. I should think you've heard that sound often here, or something like it.
Yes, sir. Mrs. Fairfax says it is one of the housekeepers who laughs in that way, but I have never seen this housekeeper myself.
Just so. It was her.
I don't think you should have her in your house, sir. She is not to be trusted.
You are no talking fool, Jane. Just let's talk no more about it. You ought to go to bed.
All right then, sir. Good night. And I left. He seemed surprised that I was leaving, very inconsistently so, as he had just told me to leave.
Jane, you are leaving in that way? After you have saved my life? At least shake hands.
He offered me his hand. I gave him mine. He took it first in one, and then in both his own.
You are.
He paused.
You are.
He paused again.
You are.
He proceeded hastily.
You are my cherished preserver.
I am glad that I happened to be awake. And I left. I regained my bed, but never thought of sleep. Too feverish to rest. I rose as soon as day dawned. It will probably come as no surprise to you, dear audience, but a few weeks after this strange ordeal, Mr. Rochester came before me.
I offer you my hand, my heart, and a share of all my possessions.
Me? Sir, you must be mistaken.
Jane, I'm asked to walk through life at your side
As my best earthly companion. Engaged. Me, Jane. Plain and poor orphan Jane. Engaged. Joy soon effaced all my other feelings. We entered the humble chapel. The priest waited at the altar. All was still. One stranger only sat in a remote corner. The service began. In the presence of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we are together here today for the marriage of Jane Eyre and Edward Rochester. Marriage is a way of life, made holy by God. If any of you know any impediment why the two of them may not be joined in marriage today, do now confess it. He paused, as the custom is. When is the pause after this sentence ever broken by reply? Not perhaps once in 100 years. Here, however, the stranger in the corner spoke.
I declare the existence of an impediment.
What? Said the Reverend. What is the nature of the impediment? Perhaps it might be explained away.
Hardly, was the answer. Mr. Rochester has a wife, now living.
My nerves vibrated to those words as they had never vibrated to thunder.
Who are you? Said Mr. Rochester. My name is Briggs. I'm a solicitor from London. I have a record of marriage here from St. James's Church in Jamaica. It states that Mr. Rochester married one Bertha Mason some 15 years ago. Well, that proves that I had a wife. It doesn't prove that she's still living. Bertha Mason is now living at Thornfield Hall.
Impossible, said the Reverend. I'm an old resident of the neighborhood, and I have never heard of a Bertha Mason living at Thornfield. Enough, said Mr. Rochester. There will be no wedding today. I'm little better than a devil at this moment. It is true what this man says. I had a wife, and the wife to whom I was married lives. Bertha Mason is now living at Thornfield Hall. A lunatic who would burn you as you slept. You will look astonished. Come up to the house and let me introduce you to my wife. We entered a hidden door on the 3rd story, which led to a secret room with no windows. There burnt a fire. At the far end of the room, a figure ran backwards and forwards. What it was, whether beast or human being, one could not at first sight tell. It grovelled on all fours and snatched at us like a wild animal. The clothed hyena rose up on its hind legs and bellowed. She parted her shaggy locks from her visage and gazed wildly at her visitors. Step out of the way, said Mr. Rochester. She has no knife now, but one never knows, she's so cunning. The lunatic sprang and grappled Mr. Rochester by the throat. The two of them struggled. He could have set her off with a well-planted blow to the face, but he would not strike. He would only wrestle. At last, he mastered her arms and bound her to a chair. That is my wife. Such is the sole conjugal embrace I am ever to know. And this woman, Jane, is what I wished to have. Compare these clear eyes with these red balls yonder, and then judge me. But remember, with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. Now off with you all! I must lock up my prize. We all withdrew. I shut myself in my room and bolted the door so that none might intrude, and proceeded not to weep, not to mourn, but to mechanically take off my wedding dress and replace it with the plain gown I had worn yesterday, as I had thought for the last time. Jane Eyre, who had almost been a bride, was a cold, solitary girl again. I looked at the wishes I had held yesterday, so blooming. They now lay stark, chilled corpses, never to be revived. Mr. Rochester was not what I had thought him. From his presence I must go, that I perceived well. Leave Thornfield at once. I unbolted my door, and there he was. Here is Mr. Rochester's story. I was 21, Jane, and sent halfway across the world to marry a bride already courted for me. £30,000 was the price my father required in this connection. She dazzled me at first, so we married. My bride's mother I had never seen. I thought her dead. But the honeymoon over, I realized my mistake. The mother was mad and shut up in a lunatic asylum. My wife quickly began to exhibit her own outbursts of violence. With frightful rapidity, vices sprang up quickly and rankly. Doors were locked, windows barred. The doctors confirmed that my wife was mad. She harmed herself and anyone who came into her path. Only cruelty would control the behavior, and I could not use cruelty. One night, woken by her fiery yells, I took a pistol from my trunk, meaning to shoot myself. But a wind blew
you through my casement, and a new thought resolved in my mind. Go home, to England. Take her to Thornfield Hall. Have her cared for. Let her identity and her marriage to you be buried in oblivion. To say that I have a wife is an empty mockery, Jane. I should not have deceived you. I have for the first time found what I can truly love. I found you. I should not have deceived you. I was wrong. But I feared. This was cowardly. I should have pleaded with you openly as I do now. Jane, forgive me now. Jane, accept me now. Jane, I see you. A pause. A hand of fiery iron grasped me. Jane, do you understand what I ask of you? Only this promise. I will be yours, Mr. Rochester. Mr. Rochester, I will not be yours. I must leave you, sir. Farewell. Farewell forever. I went as far away from Thornfield as I could. And since time restraints limit how much I can tell you about this period, I shall only give you a brief summary. I found refuge in a family very far off. I became incredibly close with them, almost regarding them as my family. I became a teacher at the local village school and found fulfillment in my pupils. Coincidentally, it turned out that the family I sought refuge with were actually my long-lost cousins. Another coincidence resulted in me inheriting £20,000. Coincidences abound. I was no longer a poor orphan. I was freer now than a bird. Another man proposed to me, a clergyman, who wanted me to accompany him to India for missionary work. But I could not forget. And so I turned down this clergyman's offer. Thornfield Hall and Mr. Rochester still called out to me, and I felt I must journey back to visit, just to check. I arrived back at Thornfield Hall and looked with timorous joy at what I expected to be the stately house. Instead, I saw a blackened ruin. No roof, no battlements, no chimney. All had crashed in. There was a silence of death about the place. Had life been wrecked as well as property? I returned to the inn at the village. The innkeeper host himself brought me my breakfast. I instructed him to shut the door, sit down, I have some questions to ask you. But when he complied, I scarcely knew where to begin. Such horror had I at the possible answers. You know Thornfield Hall, of course, I managed to say at last. Oh, yes, I was the late Mr. Rochester's butler. Late? Is he dead? Oh, I mean the present Mr. Edward's father. No one's living at Thornfield Hall now, Mum. Don't suppose you're from the area, or you would have heard what happened there last autumn. A fire broke out the dead of night, and before the fire engines could arrive, the whole building was a mass of flame. A fire? Was it known how the fire originated? Oh, the guest, ma'am, the guest. I don't suppose you know that there was a lady, a lunatic, who was kept in the house. I have heard something of that. It was her that set the fire going, ma'am. It said that once she tried to burn her husband in his bed as he slept once, but this time she turned the whole building alight. The master was very brave and got the servants all out of their beds and helped them outside before returning back in to go get his wife out of her room. But she was already on the roof, ma'am. Witnessed it with my own eyes. She stood up there and she bellowed like some strange animal. She yelled, and then she jumped, and the next moment she lay smashed on the pavement.
Oh my. Dead.
Dead as the stones on which her brains and blood were scattered.
Were any other lives lost?
Oh, some say it would have been better if there had been, ma'am.
Why? What do you mean by that?
Poor Mr. Edward. Some say it was a just judgment on him for keeping his marriage secret and for trying to take a second wife while the first was living. But for my part, I pity him. No, Mr. Edward is alive, but some say it would be better if he were dead.
Why? What do you mean by that? How?
Mr. Edward is stone blind. Stone blind is Mr. Edward.
I had feared much worse. Where is he? Where is he living now? Take me to him!
The cottage door opened slowly, and a figure came out into the twilight and stood on the step. A man without a hat. He reached forth his hand slowly as if to feel whether it rained. Dusk as it was, I recognized him. It was Edward Rochester, my Edward Rochester, and no other.
Hello? I said quietly. He put forth his hand with a quick gesture, as if trying to see with those sightless eyes. Who is there? What sweet madness has seized me? What delusion has come over me?
No madness, sir. No delusion. Your mind, sir, is too strong for that.
Is that you?
He put forth his hand, and I took it. First in one of mine, and then in both.
Her very fingers. Are you real?
I am real, sir. I am come back to you. Audience, I married him.
Asterisk. This is not simply the story of a story ending once the woman finds her partner. No. I, Jane, am no bird, and no net ensnares me. No man either. I'm a free human being with an independent will. Instead, this is the story of a woman who yearns for more, and who knows her own value from the very start, and that being recognized in the partner she chooses for the rest of her life. And that, audience, is a very good tale indeed.